The forest was quiet, unnervingly so. The kind of silence that clings to you, wrapping itself around your thoughts and urging you to listen for something. Anything that could break the stillness. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their dark trunks disappearing into the fog that hung low over the ground. It was the sort of place where shadows seemed to have a life of their own, creeping slowly as the day began to give way to dusk. A quiet that only the deepest parts of the wilderness could conjure. Then, suddenly, there was a sound. A sharp, frantic cry that cut through the fog like a knife. It was the cry of a child, high-pitched and desperate, echoing in the emptiness. A sound so out of place in the vast, untamed forest, it might as well have been a ghost calling out from the shadows. Somewhere deep within the woods, an accident had occurred. A twisted wreckage of metal and glass lay scattered on the side of a forgotten mountain road. The rain had come and gone, leaving the earth wet and heavy, and the world around it had taken on the color of sorrow. The storm's fury had ended, but the damage had already been done. At the scene, the world felt frozen in time. A lone figure approached the wreckage, a massive, black shape emerging from the trees, moving with an eerie purpose. It was not the type of creature that most would have hoped to encounter in the aftermath of such a tragedy. In fact, if you had been able to glimpse its form, your first instinct might have been to flee in terror. This was no delicate forest creature, no harmless deer or playful fox. No, this was a bear, predator, the kind of animal that made even seasoned hikers wary. But something strange was about to unfold. Something that no one would have ever expected from the creature that loomed over the wreck. Because this bear was not searching for food. Not today. It was searching for a life to save. And it would be a child's life. One that no one had known was there, stranded and alone, left to face the wreckage of fate. The bear stopped a few feet away from the twisted metal, its dark eyes narrowing in a way that suggested it had heard something. The baby's cries were faint now, desperate gasps of air amidst the wreckage, but still alive. Alive, and waiting to be saved. What happened next would defy every expectation of what we know about nature, and would change everything for the baby, the bear, and for anyone who would come to hear this story. This is a story of an unlikely hero, an animal who acted out of instinct but revealed a depth of compassion that left even the most hardened human hearts in awe. But before we go any further, let's take you back to the beginning of the story, a moment where the fate of a child and a bear would forever be intertwined in the heart of an ancient forest. The rain had stopped. The clouds, heavy with their burden, had dispersed, leaving behind only a low mist that clung to the earth like a shroud. It was late afternoon, and the dying light filtered through the trees, casting long shadows on the broken road. There had been no other cars in sight for miles, no sign of human life since the accident. But amidst the stillness of the forest, in the wake of the storm, something else stirred, something far more primal. The bear moved quietly through the underbrush, its massive form gliding between the trees with a grace that belied its size. It was a creature of the wild, a black bear, nearly 500 pounds of muscle and instinct. It wasn't hunting. No, not today. This bear had no need for food. Its senses were alert to something else. Something had drawn it here. A faint sound. A cry, distant, fragile. It was the kind of sound a bear might easily ignore in the wilderness, but this one did not. The cry tugged at the bear's attention like a thread pulling it closer. The bear's head tilted slightly, its nose twitching as it sniffed the air, trying to identify the source. It was faint, weak, but unmistakable. A baby. The bear's eyes flicked toward the wreckage. A pile of twisted metal, shattered glass, and the remnants of a life that had been shattered in an instant. The car, what was left of it, lay on its side, its doors hanging open, and the smell of oil and gasoline lingered in the air. The bear took another cautious step forward, its massive paws crushing the earth beneath it as it approached the wreck. The cries grew louder, more desperate. There, among the wreckage, partially obscured by the crumpled frame of the car, was a tiny bundle. It was a baby, no older than a few months, its face streaked with dirt and tears, its tiny hands outstretched, reaching for a world it couldn't understand. The baby's cries were sharp and piercing, the kind of sound that demanded attention, a plea for help from someone or something that could offer a shred of comfort. The bear froze. It was an odd, even unnatural sight. A bear, a creature built for power and survival, facing a fragile, helpless life. But the bear's instincts weren't all about strength and hunger. There was something else that guided its actions, a primal compassion, as old as the earth itself. The bear knelt down, slowly, its massive frame casting a dark shadow over the baby. The baby's cries faltered as it looked up, its eyes wide with a mix of confusion and fear. For a moment, the bear and the baby seemed to be locked in some kind of silent standoff, both unsure of the other's intentions. What could the bear possibly want with a human child? And why hadn't it simply walked away, as most would have expected? The bear sniffed at the baby, its large nose hovering just inches above the tiny face. The smell of the child's fear filled the air, but there was something else, the faint, underlying scent of life, of hope. The bear's fur rippled as it slowly extended a paw toward the baby, carefully brushing away some of the dirt and debris that had accumulated around its tiny form. The baby flinched at first, but then, as if sensing no threat, it let out a soft, gurgling sound, the first of a series of weak, hopeful whimpers. It was as if the bear knew that this small creature, vulnerable and fragile, was in need of something the forest could not provide: protection. The bear could smell the blood, the tears, the vulnerability, but more than that, it could sense the baby's loneliness, the helplessness that had driven its cries. In the way animals understand the world, without judgment or expectation, the bear recognized a need. It wasn't hunger that stirred it. It was something far deeper, a quiet bond that tugged at its heart, urging it to act. For a moment, the world stood still. The bear's dark eyes studied the baby with a gaze that seemed almost human, curious, uncertain, yet unafraid. The bear made no move to harm the child. There was only an unspoken understanding between them, something beyond mere instinct. The baby, still trembling, blinked its wide, wet eyes up at the massive creature, sensing no immediate danger. Perhaps it understood, on some level, that this was no ordinary animal. This was something different, something not defined by fear, but by a quiet compassion, the kind that exists deep within the heart of nature itself. The bear let out a low grunt, a sound of contemplation, before reaching down and gently nudging the baby with its snout. There was something almost tender in its touch, a softness that contradicted the raw power of the bear's form. It was a move that might have startled any human, but the baby, in its confusion, let out a single cry, a more plaintive, weaker sound. The bear paused for a moment, then lowered its large body to the ground, positioning itself near the baby as if to offer comfort. Its presence was protective, unwavering. The wind rustled the leaves above them, but all was still between the bear and the infant. For a moment, there was no need for words, no need for action, just an animal's quiet understanding of the situation at hand. A baby in danger, alone, and a bear that, against all odds, had decided to take the first step. The bear could have walked away. It could have left the baby to its fate, as the forest could be indifferent to such things. But something kept it there. Something pulled the bear to stay by the child's side, as if fate itself had brought them together. The bear gave another grunt, this time louder, almost as if making a decision. With a slow and deliberate movement, it lowered its large, powerful head to the baby's side, wrapping its long, coarse fur around the child like a protective cocoon. And then, without warning, the bear began to move. The earth beneath it shifted as the creature rose to its feet, its body trembling with the weight of its own movements. Carefully, it gathered the child in its paws, holding it with an unexpected tenderness. The baby's cries had subsided, replaced by an eerie stillness. The baby seemed to sense that it was no longer alone, no longer lost. The bear turned and began to move into the heart of the forest, its every step careful, deliberate, as if it understood that this journey wasn't just one of survival, but one of care. The forest, dense with shadows and light, stretched out before them, silent and waiting. And so the journey began, a journey that no one would ever have expected. a bear and a baby, bound together by an unspoken bond, moving deeper into the wild heart of the forest. What awaited them there, no one could yet know. But for now, in the quiet of the woods, there was only the sound of the bear's heavy steps and the soft breaths of a child being carried toward an unknown fate. The forest was thick with ancient trees, their gnarled roots winding deep into the earth, their leaves whispering secrets to one another as the wind passed through. As the bear trudged through the underbrush, the baby, N, now quiet but still very much alive, rested in its arms. The rhythmic swish of the bear's thick fur was the only sound that accompanied them, muffled by the dampness of the forest floor, still slick from the rain. A veil of mist clung to the trees, weaving a shroud around the pair, as if nature itself were conspiring to keep them hidden from prying eyes. The bear moved with purpose, its large paws sinking into the wet earth with each step. Its senses were alert, ears flicking at every slight rustle in the foliage. The baby lay nestled close to the bear's chest, wrapped in the warmth of the bear's fur, the tiny body still and trembling. There was no cry now, just an overwhelming silence that seemed to permeate everything. The baby, with its small, fragile form, had drifted into a kind of dazed, exhausted stupor, its eyes fluttering closed in and out of sleep. As the bear navigated the dense forest, the landscape changed. The deep shadows of the old trees began to clear, revealing a small clearing where sunlight broke through the thick canopy above. The clearing was like a hidden oasis in the midst of the wilderness, its grass soft and damp, the air fresh with the scent of pine and wet earth. A small brook trickled nearby, its waters clear and glistening in the faint sunlight. The bear paused at the edge of the clearing, its sharp eyes scanning the area. It could feel the presence of other creatures, perhaps deer or foxes, but none dared approach. The bear had always been a creature of the wild, feared by most, and today it was more than capable of defending itself, should the need arise. But for now, the bear wasn't thinking of hunting. It was thinking of the baby. The baby. The bear gently lowered itself to the ground, its massive body settling down beside the brook. Carefully, it placed the child on a patch of soft grass, its movements slow and deliberate. The baby's tiny form was so fragile, so small in comparison to the bear's bulk. But despite the stark contrast between them, there was something tender in the way the bear maneuvered, almost as though it understood that this was not just any life. It was a life that needed nurturing. For a long moment, the bear simply watched the baby, its dark eyes filled with an emotion that was hard to decipher. Perhaps it was concern, or perhaps a strange sense of duty. Either way, the bear's protective instincts kicked into overdrive. The baby stirred, its small fists clenching and unclenching as it made a soft sound. Almost a sigh, a vulnerable murmur. The bear's ears pricked up at the sound, its muscles tensing as it prepared to act. It was then that the bear made the first of many unexpected decisions. Instead of wandering off in search of food, the bear moved closer to the water, its powerful body cutting through the thick grass, leaving behind a trail of wet prints. It didn't seem to be searching for something to eat for itself. No, it was searching for something for the baby. The bear knew that it needed to feed the child to give it sustenance, despite having no real experience with babies or humans, or anything beyond the basic survival instincts that came with being a wild creature. The bear's sharp claws dipped into the soft earth near the brook, and it slowly uprooted a cluster of wild plants. It was a mix of roots and leaves, some medicinal herbs, others edible, things that the bear instinctively knew to be both safe and nourishing. The bear didn't know what a baby needed, but its survival instincts told it that food was necessary. It crushed the leaves and roots beneath its paws, releasing their natural juices, and then nudged the mixture toward the baby with its snout. The baby, still too weak to move, didn't respond, but the bear waited, unwavering. The bear then looked up to the sky, as though seeking a sign, a direction. The wind shifted, rustling the leaves in the trees above. The bear rose to its feet, its sharp eyes scanning the area again. Satisfied that it wasn't being watched, it began searching the surrounding area for something more, something else the baby might need. It was then that the bear found what it had been searching for. a nearby tree heavy with fruit, its branches drooping low to the ground. The bear, with surprising agility, reached up and tore a cluster of ripe berries from the branch, their deep red color glistening in the fading light. The bear placed them gently on the ground next to the baby, a kind of offering. This was the bear's gift, a sign of the deep, primal connection that existed between it and the infant. As the day wore on, the bear continued its quiet guardianship. It moved around the clearing, gathering materials for a shelter, branches, leaves, and moss to create a makeshift nest that would shield the baby from the night's cold. The bear worked with precision and care, its every action deliberate. The sound of the forest seemed to fade away as it focused on the task at hand. Each piece of moss, each branch, was chosen with care, and the makeshift nest that formed around the baby was surprisingly soft and warm. The baby, after a time, began to stir again, blinking its eyes open in the dimming light. It looked around, dazed and confused, unsure of what had happened or how it had arrived here. Its tiny hands grasped weakly at the air, seeking something familiar, something to hold on to. The bear, ever watchful, sat nearby, its eyes locked on the baby's every movement. Slowly, the bear's massive form shifted toward the baby, leaning down to nudge it gently with its nose. It was then that the baby, still weak, reached up with its tiny, trembling hand and touched the bear's fur. The touch was tentative at first, but as the baby felt the warmth of the bear's coat, it seemed to draw comfort from the connection. The baby's heart slowed, its cries stilled. There was no more fear in its eyes, only a strange kind of peace. The bear, for the first time in hours, relaxed. It settled next to the baby's side, its massive body curling around the fragile infant as a shield against the elements. The bond between them, though unspoken, had formed in that moment. A bond of protection, of survival, and of an animal's instinctual compassion for another life. Nightfall came, and the forest grew darker still. The clearing was bathed in a faint, ethereal light, the stars just beginning to pierce the sky. The bear remained close to the baby, its ears pricked, alert to any sounds in the night. But for now, there was nothing but the soft rustle of the wind, the gentle murmur of the brook, and the steady breathing of the baby resting against the bear's warm side. In the heart of the forest, the bond between the bear and the child had solidified. Not through language, not through any human gesture, but through something deeper, something primal. And in that moment, beneath the canopy of stars, the forest watched silently, knowing that the child was no longer alone. But the journey was far from over. The search party had been on the move for hours. A group of concerned hikers, a few local forest rangers, and emergency responders, all with their eyes peeled and their ears straining for any sign of the missing child. Word had spread quickly in the nearby towns, and it wasn't long before a group of volunteers had gathered, each determined to find the baby and bring them back to safety. The forest, however, had other plans. As the search party made their way deeper into the wilderness, they encountered nothing but a dense tangle of trees and underbrush, the occasional broken twig or disturbed patch of dirt marking the path of the crash. The car wreck had been located earlier in the day, and the scene had been combed over thoroughly, but the baby was nowhere to be found. No sign of a child, no clue as to how or why they had vanished into the forest. The forest rangers, familiar with the rugged terrain, had suggested tracking in the direction the bear might have gone. Bears, after all, could cover vast distances quickly and were known to frequent the area. It was a long shot. There were plenty of wild animals in these woods, but the idea of a bear taking the child had never crossed anyone's mind. Still, it was worth pursuing. The group had split into smaller teams, and as they ventured deeper into the forest, they could feel the tension rise. With each passing minute, the realization began to set in that they weren't just looking for a missing child. They were searching for a miracle. As the sky darkened, the forest became a labyrinth of shadow. The dense foliage pressed in on them from all sides, every crackle of a branch beneath their feet seeming to echo in the silence. They moved carefully, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like fragile beams of light. It wasn't just the trees that seemed to obscure their path. It was the unsettling sense that something larger, something ancient, was watching them from the depths of the forest. The team's lead tracker, a seasoned ranger named Matt, paused. His breath came in short bursts, his flashlight beam swinging back and forth. He knelt down to examine a patch of disturbed earth, his brow furrowing as he ran his fingers through the dirt. "Look at this," Matt said, his voice low but intense. The others gathered around him, their faces tense with anticipation. The patch of dirt was trampled, the soil churned as if something or someone had been walking through it. But it wasn't just any animal track. It was a bear's. Matt's eyes narrowed. "This is fresh, not more than a few hours old." The group exchanged uneasy glances. A bear in these parts was nothing to take lightly, but the idea that it could have come into contact with a baby seemed impossible. "Do you think it could have taken the baby?" One of the responders, a young woman named Sarah, asked, her voice trembling. "It's possible," Matt said, still kneeling, examining the tracks. "But it's not typical. Bears don't usually take humans. They'd avoid them if they could. And this doesn't seem like a predatory path." The group grew silent as Matt stood up, motioning for everyone to continue following the trail. Their footsteps were muffled in the thick underbrush, and the weight of the situation hung heavily in the air. Could a bear really have taken the child? And if so, why? Was the baby alive? Was it safe? Suddenly, Matt's flashlight beam flickered across something that made his heart skip a beat. There, ahead of them, in the midst of a small clearing, something was moving. Something large. The shadows seemed to shift unnaturally, and for a moment, the group froze, unsure if what they were seeing was real. And then the shape emerged from the shadows. A massive, dark figure, its fur glistening in the pale moonlight. It was the bear. The group stood frozen in place, the sight of the enormous creature both terrifying and awe-inspiring. The bear, sensing their presence, turned its head, its eyes gleaming with an intelligence that was both alien and profoundly human. It stood still for a long moment, almost as if measuring them, deciding how to respond. Its massive body loomed in the clearing, the muscles rippling beneath its fur as it shifted its weight. But then something happened that no one could have predicted. The bear's gaze flickered down to the ground, and with a soft grunt, it stepped aside, revealing the child. The baby, clad in ragged clothes, dirt-streaked and pale, was lying safely nestled on a bed of moss and leaves, curled up against the warmth of the bear's side. The child's tiny form was so vulnerable, so fragile in comparison to the hulking presence of the bear, but there was no question about it. The baby was alive and somehow, against all odds, protected. The group stood in stunned silence, the weight of the moment pressing down on them. They couldn't believe their eyes. How had the bear done this? Why had it brought the baby here? One of the hikers, a middle-aged man named Ben, was the first to recover from the shock. He took a tentative step forward, his voice hesitant. "It's the baby. It's really them. Is the baby okay?" Sarah asked, her voice trembling as she reached out, unsure whether to approach. The bear's eyes followed her every movement. It wasn't a hostile stare. It was more like a watchful gaze, one that was both protective and wary of what these humans might do. Matt stepped forward slowly, his hand raised in a gesture of calm. "We need to be careful. That bear is protective. We don't want to make any sudden moves." As he spoke, the bear let out a low, rumbling growl, its large paws shifting in the dirt as it placed itself between the humans and the child, creating a physical barrier. Its stance was one of defense, not aggression, but there was no mistaking the message. "Stay away. We need to get the baby back to safety," Matt said softly, but his words were laced with an awe that none of them could quite shake. "But we also need to respect this bear." The group nodded, their faces filled with a mix of disbelief and reverence. The situation was unlike anything any of them had encountered before. The bear, this wild, untamed creature, had acted in a way that defied everything they thought they knew about animals. It had protected the child. It had kept them safe, nourished, and alive. There was a long moment of silence, the air thick with tension, before Matt finally spoke again. We're going to have to approach carefully. The baby needs to be taken back. But this bear, it's not just an animal. It's something more. The bear gave a low, deep grunt, almost as if understanding the words, and then, almost as if resigning to the inevitable, it stepped back. Its eyes never left the baby. Its gaze softened slightly, but its watchfulness remained unwavering. Matt approached cautiously, moving slowly but purposefully. "We need to get the baby now. Let's go." With delicate hands, Matt scooped up the child, feeling the warmth of its tiny body in his arms. The baby stirred, its small face scrunching up, but it didn't cry. Instead, it seemed to rest more deeply against Matt's chest. The bear watched the exchange, its eyes flickering between the humans and the baby. There was a brief moment of tension, a moment where it seemed the bear might strike out, but instead, it lowered its head, a quiet acceptance in its posture. Then, the bear turned, stepping away into the forest, its massive form fading into the darkness, disappearing as if it had never been there. The group stood frozen, their hearts racing, not quite able to comprehend what they had just witnessed. The miracle had happened. The child was safe, but the forest and the bear were gone. The forest was silent once more. The group stood in stunned stillness, the baby cradled gently in Matt's arms, its tiny face peaceful but smeared with dirt and tears. The danger had passed, but there was an odd sense of unease that lingered in the air. They had come for a child, and they had found one, alive and safe and seemingly unharmed. But the way in which they had found it would stay with them forever. They could feel it, the weight of the encounter. The bear had not attacked, had not resisted when they took the child. Instead, it had simply watched, as if understanding that its role in this moment had ended, that it had done what it needed to do, and now it would allow the humans to take over. The thought made Matt's stomach tighten. Was the bear relinquishing the baby out of some quiet, unspoken understanding, or had it just known that it was time? The sky had darkened by the time the search party had gathered the baby and began the long trek back to the nearest clearing where a helicopter would be waiting to take them to safety. It was almost impossible to believe that the baby, who had been found crying and alone, surrounded by the wreckage of the car, was now in the arms of a human, safe and on the way home. But the forest had taken care of the child. A wild animal had taken the baby into its care and had given the most tender protection. "Matt," Sarah whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the heavy silence. "Do you think the bear will be okay? It just let us take the baby. It didn't fight us." Matt glanced back over his shoulder, scanning the trees one last time. There was no sign of the bear. It had melted back into the forest like a shadow, and they had heard nothing since. "I don't know," Matt said, his voice thick with emotion. "I've seen bears protect their young before, but I've never seen anything like this. That bear knew what it was doing. It cared for that child, and in the end, it made a decision. A decision." The words hung heavy between them, as if they carried a deeper weight than any of them could yet comprehend. As they made their way back to the helicopter, the wind picking up and tugging at their clothes, there was a moment where Matt turned back, staring at the expanse of forest behind him. His eyes searched the trees one last time, but there was nothing. The bear had vanished. And yet, despite all that they had witnessed, the decision they had been left with lingered in Matt's mind. The bear had done the unthinkable. It had saved the baby, but then it had let them take the child. Could it have fought them? Could it have kept the child, if only for itself? The questions gnawed at him. What had made the bear step aside? As the helicopter soared into the sky, carrying the baby safely away from the forest, Matt found himself unable to shake the image of the bear, the quiet, dark figure standing watch over the child. It was a moment he knew he would never forget. A moment where nature, in all its raw power and primal instinct, had done something that no one could have predicted. A moment that blurred the lines between wild animal and human compassion. The baby's safe return to civilization became a media frenzy in the days that followed. News outlets all over the world picked up the story, amazed by the incredible survival story of the child. A mysterious bear had rescued the baby from the wreckage, cared for it for hours, and then, almost as if understanding the child's fate had shifted, had quietly relinquished the baby to human care. The world marveled at the inexplicable act of kindness, the unlikely heroism of the bear, who had done what even many humans might not have been able to do. In every news report, in every photo, the message was the same. This was not a simple rescue. It was something more, something profound. The child, whom no one had yet named, was safe in the care of their parents, back in the warmth and safety of their home. The forest had given them a second chance at life, and the bear had been the guardian. But, as the headlines soon faded into the background, the deeper implications of what had happened seemed to drift into silence. Had the bear known? Had it understood that the child belonged with humans? Was it simply an act of self-preservation for the baby? Or was it an unexpected decision born from a deeper connection between two beings, one wild and one human, linked by something that neither species could fully understand? In the weeks that followed, the child's parents, their faces both grateful and haunted by the mystery of what had occurred, spoke out publicly, acknowledging the bear's act of kindness. "We don't know how to thank the forest," the father said in an interview, his voice thick with emotion. "We don't know how to thank that bear for bringing our child back to us." But despite their words, despite the public outpouring of support, something lingered in the air. A question, a whisper, that no one could answer. Why had the bear let go? The answer would never come. Not from the bear, not from anyone. A month passed, and life returned to some semblance of normalcy for the child and their family. The world moved on to other stories, other tragedies, other triumphs. Yet, in the deep, untamed heart of the forest, something remained. The bond between the baby and the bear, a bond that no one could fully explain, continued to resonate in the minds of those who had witnessed the miraculous rescue. On a quiet, foggy morning, as the forest began to wake from its slumber, there was one final glimpse of the bear. From the edge of the clearing, near the site of the crash, a shadow moved between the trees. The bear, its massive frame now just a silhouette against the dim light of dawn, paused and looked back toward the direction the child had been taken. And then, as if it had fulfilled its purpose, the bear turned and disappeared into the wilderness once more. It walked away, its presence fading into the mist, as if it were returning to its own world, its own realm of untamed mystery. The child was safe. The baby's family had been reunited, and the bear had ensured their survival. Yet, in the forest, where the lines between predator and protector were blurred, the true lesson of the rescue was still being written. What does this story mean to you? Was it an act of pure instinct, or was there something deeper at play? Can animals like the bear truly understand compassion, or was this just a fluke, a rare occurrence in the wild? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Please like, subscribe, and share your reflections on this incredible tale of kindness in the animal kingdom. And stay tuned for more stories of remarkable acts of compassion that challenge everything we think we know about the natural world. Until next time, remember, the world is full of mysteries, and sometimes the most unexpected heroes are the ones we least expect.